Well, welcome back, friends, and uh, now we will have, a short lecture on the war of the theaters and the bishops' wars. Since we have been talking about wars, first I will talk about the war of the theaters, which is known in English literary history. It is the name given to the long conflict involving the Elizabethan playwrights Ben Jonson, John Marston, and Thomas Dekker. War of the Theatres is a name given to this conflict of the Elizabethan playwrights. It covered a period when Jonson was writing for one of children's company of players in London, and Marston was working or writing for another rival group. And this is the basic reason for the conflict between these two writers. It all started off with in 1599, Marston presented a mildly satirical portrait of Ben Jonson in his Histriomastics. That same year, the retaliation came from Jonson, who replied in every man out of his humor, ridiculing Marston and his style as fustian. That was the way in which Jonson retorted. Some scholars, they think that the character of Barben Senior in Marston's Jack Drum's Entertainment, that is, a play written in 1599, performed in 1599, was a lampoon or a caricature on Ben Jonson, though this is not yet confirmed. Marston certainly thought himself attacked in Jonson's Cynthia's Revels, which appeared in 1600, and he satirized Jonson as Lambathodoria in What You Will, which appeared the very next year, 1601. Meanwhile, in Poetestar, which appeared in 1601, Jonson represented Marston as an inferior poet, look at the title, Poetestar, and a plagiarist. He also extended the attack to people who were kept away from the conflict. Dekker was involved. He was satirized as a hack playwright. Well, Thomas Dekker was also now involved. Dekker replied with his Satyromastics in 1601, which lampooned Jonson as the humorous poet. Well, the quarrel had been patched up only by 1604 because, it lasted for more than 5 to 6 years, but finally it was resolved in 1604 when Marston dedicated the Malcontent, his work Malcontent, to Ben Jonson. Some scholars even see the quarrel was based on, a difference of opinion regarding the nature of drama written by these people, by these playwrights. But it was also sharpened by the intense competition that existed between children's companies at the time during Shakespeare's days. Even in Hamlet of Shakespeare, there is a reference to the fact that the adult actors were forced to undertake provincial tours because of the boys' popularity. And it throws light upon the fierce, intense nature of competition that existed between children's companies. That's all about the War of the Theatres. Now I move on to the second war, which is better known as the Bishops' Wars. The Bishops' Wars were waged in 1639 and 1640 in British history. The name refers to two brief campaigns of intense fighting between Charles I and Scotland, particularly the Scottish people, the Scottish army. The wars were the result of Charles' endeavor to enforce the Anglican religious practice and observances in the Scottish Church. And at the same time, the Scots, they were not willing to accept episcopacy or episcopal regimes. And, this was the basic reason which triggered the battle between Charles I, the English ruler, and the Scots, or the people of Scotland. In 1637, there was a riot in Edinburgh, which led to a kind of national resistance in the entire Scotland. And in 1638, in the month of November, the General Assembly at Glasgow set Charles's orders of implementing Anglican church services. These orders were thrown into pieces, torn into pieces, and immediately as a retaliation, Charles I gathered an English force and marched toward the border in 1639. But unfortunately, he did not have enough funds with him. He was lacking sufficient funds, and also he was lacking in his confidence, particularly his troops. However, finally Charles agreed by a treaty which came to be known as the Pacification of Berwick, and he was ready or determined to leave the Scots alone with their own religious practices. This is the end of the First Bishops' War, which ended without any open fight, with Charles first signing of the Pacification of Berwick. But soon, misunderstandings broke out as to the interpretation of this signed Pacification Treaty of Berwick. And there were problems in interpreting the proviso conditions laid out in this Pacification of Berwick. The English King Charles was suspected that the Scots were intriguing with France, and this made him to use force once again against the Scottish forces. But at the same time, he did not have enough money to lead another expedition against Scotland. He wanted money, and in order to raise money, he wanted the consent of the Parliament. So he summoned the Parliament in April 1640, and this Parliament, which met only for a short while, or sat only for a short while, came to be known as the Short Parliament. And when the meeting was convened, the members first wanted a discussion of the grievances against the government of Charles I, and they were completely opposed to renewal of the war with the Scots. Thereupon, Charles decided to dissolve the Parliament, and he raised a new expedition, or new troops were recruited on his own. The subsequent military successes of the Scots in the Second Bishops' War and their seizure of the whole of Northumberland and Durham made it necessary for Charles to summon the so-called Long Parliament in November 1640, precipitating what is known as the English Civil Wars. So these two wars came to be known in British history as the Bishops' Wars. That's all about the wars.